Hey everyone, my name's Taylor and I'm going to walk through how I made this drawing. The steps and tools that I want to go over are sketching and planning, layers, copying and pasting, outlining, and coloring. To do this, I'm using the iPad Pro, Apple Pencil, and the Procreate app. Although this is a digital drawing and there are differences, this is generally the same process I have for regular paintings and drawings too. Before I start, I usually have an idea of what I want my drawings or projects to look like. I usually use a lighter color here in the planning and sketching part, or a lighter pencil on paper. This part doesn't have to be perfect and often gets adjusted as I work. This drawing started off with the simplest parts, so each of the TVs, and then I began adding the more detailed parts, so the plants. When I started this drawing, I knew I wanted kind of like a panel drawing, and my idea started off with the two TVs, each with slightly different scenes, and then the plants just kind of came naturally as they're something I enjoy drawing and also just taking care of. So a really cool tool in digital drawing is being able to work on certain layers at a time. That way each part of the drawing can be on their own layer, and you can also select what layer you want to be visible or not while you're working. It's also great for drawing behind or in front of different parts of your work or drawing. For this piece specifically, each TV and each of the plants generally have each their own layer, and on top of that, each step has their own layer. Here's a visual just to get a general sense of how I use layers. You can also delete layers that you don't need anymore, which is why you don't see my planning layers here. All I have left are the color and the outlines. Another cool function in digital drawing is copying and pasting, which I've used a bit in this specific piece as there's a lot of repetition. It's still a feature I'm getting used to though, as I'm learning to draw digitally compared to with pen and paper. Two places I did copy and paste and then also enlarge are the TVs and then the largest plant, which is supposed to be a fiddle leaf fig. Here's a visual of what copying, pasting, and enlarging looks like. You just circle it and duplicate, and then you can drag it over and enlarge it. It'll also have its own layer. Once I have my sketch finished, I'll start the outlining. Here I try to be more careful and intentional. I'll probably speed the video up a bit since it's a little repetitive, but I will point out a couple things as we go. First is that while I'm outlining, I do spend a lot of time going over lines and adjusting their thickness to add depth and movement. It also adds some interest to the drawing. A tool that makes that easier is being able to adjust the brush thickness, which is essentially the same thing as using different sized pens when you're drawing on paper. Another thing you might notice is that I start to add more detail during this part. The leaves on the snake plant are a good example. I've added a few extra lines here. Or another thing is that I didn't actually add the actual leaves to the pathos plants until I started outlining because I didn't want my outlines to be too overwhelming. I'll also just point out that right here is why I love layers, because as I'm working on each plant, I don't have to worry about the other plants getting in the way. I can just draw the whole plant and then erase the parts that I need to on the different layers as I go. And the last step that I want to talk about is coloring, which I don't want to say is my favorite part because I actually find doing the outlines really relaxing, but I do spend a lot of time picking color schemes and adjusting colors because I love playing with colors. um, Three tools that I'll talk about in this part are the color palettes and circles, and I'll talk about dragging and dropping colors, and I'll also talk about the color selection tool. So here is the color palettes that I use to save colors for this drawing. I usually start a fresh palette every time I start a new drawing. Procreate has the disc, classic, and value options for picking colors, and I tend to stick with the classic option. To make coloring faster, you can also use the drag and drop function, which you do by selecting a color and a layer that you want to work on, and then dragging the color from the top right corner onto the empty area or inside of a shape that you have. And the last color tool is the selection tool, which I find useful when using reference images that have colors that I already like and want to use. For this one, I found an image of different terracotta shades for the plant pots, and this just made picking colors for the plant pots much easier. Like in the outlining step, I add a lot more detail in the coloring step, so I don't always outline every single part that I want to add shading or depth to. So you'll notice that I do add a lot of darker or lighter colors onto different parts of the drawings. You'll probably notice that a lot in the shading of the pots right here. So I'll just fast forward through the rest of the coloring. And then here at the end, you can see that I'm just adding little circles to the bottom of the TV to kind of act as shading and just to pull the drawing together a little bit more. And then the last step is just picking the color for the background, which always takes a while and I always change my mind so many times. So here is the final drawing. Thanks for listening and watching me walk through this drawing with you.